The silent prisoner. The alien city was filled with noise and light. Tall crystal towers shined under the twin moons. The streets were alive with merchants, guards, and workers moving in endless rhythm. But in the darkest corner of the city stood a cold prison made of stone and steel. Inside that prison sat a young alien woman, her hands chained, her lips closed forever. Her tongue had been cut out by her own people. They called her a liar. They said her words had brought shame and fear. They marked her as cursed every day. Guards passed by her cell. Some spat on the ground. Others laughed at her silence. Children were told stories of the tongueless liar, a warning of what happened to those who spoke against the council. Yet behind her silent eyes burned something stronger than fear. There was a secret, a truth she could no longer speak, but it lived inside her mind, far from the prison walls. In the lower levels of the city worked a human mechanic. His name was not important to most. He was only known as the outsider, the one who fixed old ships, patched broken machines, and kept the port alive. Humans were rare here, treated as useful but not respected. He kept his head down and worked with grease and fire. But one evening, while repairing a broken power drone, he heard whispers from a group of aliens. They spoke of the tongueless prisoner, how she once screamed warnings in the marketplace, how she shouted that danger was coming, how she cried that the city's heart was failing. But the leaders silenced her, and the crowd cheered. The human listened carefully, his hands paused, his eyes narrowed. That night, he walked past the prison gates. The guards sneered at him but did not stop him. After all, he was just a mechanic, not a threat. Yet he slowed his steps and looked inside. His eyes met hers. The silent prisoner stared back at him. Her gaze was sharp, like a blade cutting through the dark. She raised her hands slightly, making small motions, her fingers trembling but precise. He frowned, trying to understand. She tapped her chain once, then pointed toward the ground, then toward the sky. He tilted his head, confused. But something inside told him this was not madness. This was a message. The next day, he returned again, pretending to walk by on his way to work. Once more their eyes met. Once more her hands moved in strange patterns. She was trying to speak without a tongue, trying to tell him something important. He felt the weight of her silence pressing against him. Rumors spread in the city. Whispers in the markets said the human was wasting time near the cursed liar. Some laughed, others warned him. Do not trust her, they said. She lied once. She will lie again. But the human mechanic did not believe so easily. He had seen many lies in his life, but her eyes did not belong to a liar. They belonged to someone carrying a burden too heavy to bear. One night, in his small workshop, he sat alone staring at old tools. The memory of her gestures burned in his mind. Why would a liar keep trying to speak even after her tongue was gone? Why risk punishment again? Unless the truth she carried was more dangerous than silence itself. He could not sleep. He could not ignore it. The next morning he carried a piece of chalk in his pocket. When he passed the prison again, he waited for the guards to turn away. Then he held it up, scratching a simple mark on the stone wall near her cell. A circle with a line. Her eyes widened. She understood. She bent down and with her chained fingers tried to trace marks in the dust of the floor. The human leaned closer, heart pounding. The shapes she drew were not random. They were symbols, warnings, codes of something hidden beneath the city. He realized she had not lied. She had tried to warn them, and they silenced her for it. But what danger was so great that they would cut out her tongue to stop her from speaking? The human felt a chill crawl down his spine. The city above his head hummed with energy. The crystal towers glowed brighter than ever. But somewhere deep beneath their shining world, something was waiting, something she had seen first, something no one wanted to believe, and now only he could listen. Only he could choose whether to ignore her or risk everything to uncover the truth. Asterisk the human suspicion. The human mechanic could not forget the symbols she scratched into the dust. All night he kept seeing them in his dreams, circles, lines, and strange marks that did not belong to the language of the city. He woke up with sweat on his forehead. The sound of humming engines in the distance felt heavier than usual. At the docks, while repairing an old cargo hauler, His mind was not on the broken gears, it was on her, the silent prisoner. He remembered her eyes, so sharp and desperate. No madness there, only urgency. The other workers noticed his distraction. One alien grunted, "You dream of her now. Outsider, better be careful. She cursed her own blood." They laughed. But their laughter felt nervous. That evening, he returned to the prison. He did not speak, he only watched. She was waiting, her thin fingers moved fast, carving shapes against the dirt. Again and again she pointed at the ground, then at the sky, then at the heavy crystal towers above. He frowned. Something about her movements reminded him of engine diagrams, like when energy lines cross and overload. Later, in his workshop, he pulled out an old power core blueprint, the kind of design he used to repair broken reactors. As he compared her symbols to the blueprint, his chest grew tight. Her marks looked like stress lines, warning signs of energy collapse. Could it be true, he thought? Could the city's great crystal heart, the one that powered everything, be failing? The thought alone was dangerous. If the council heard him speak of this, they would silence him too, just as they had silenced her. Still, he could not ignore it. He had seen too many machines fall apart when ignored. And this woman's warnings were carved with the hands of someone who knew. The next day, while repairing a trader's ship, he asked careful questions. "Has the city had power surges?" he whispered. The alien trader looked left and right before answering. Strange flickers, lights shaking. "But the council says it is nothing." The human nodded slowly. Inside he felt the pieces falling together. That night he walked through the lower tunnels, pretending to search for scrap, but his eyes followed old energy lines glowing faintly in the dark. He placed his hand against the wall. It vibrated too much, unstable, he whispered under his breath. She was right. The next morning, the guards mocked him again when he passed the prison. But this time he stopped, staring at her cell. And in a low voice he said, "I believe you." Her eyes widened. Her hands trembled as she pressed against the bars. Her silence screamed louder than words. The human began to notice other signs too. The marketplace lights flickered for seconds at a time. Water pumps sputtered, small machines overheated without reason. People complained, but the council always dismissed it, calling them rumors, the same word they had used to destroy her life. In secret, the mechanic started collecting old parts, hiding them under loose panels in his workshop. Tools, wires, sensors, he knew he might need them. Every time he worked with sparks flying around him, he thought of her, thought of how cruel it was to take her tongue, to punish her for trying to save them. Days passed, and his suspicion grew stronger. One evening, while walking home, he noticed guards posting new signs across the city. They read, "Do not spread false stories. Trust only the council." The mechanic clenched his fists. It was clear now the leaders knew something was wrong. But instead of fixing it, they were hiding it in the prison. She sat weaker each day, but whenever he passed by, she forced herself to raise her hands, to remind him, to push him toward action. He understood her now. Her eyes begged him not to stop, not to give up. The human realized he was the only one who listened, the only one who could still speak her truth aloud. His suspicion had become belief. Belief had become fear. And fear was now turning into resolve. For if the city's heart failed, if her warnings were true, millions would die, and their silence would bury them all. And the human mechanic, an outsider in a city that mocked him, was the only one willing to carry her truth forward, no matter the cost. Whispers of the past, the human mechanic could no longer deny it. The prisoner was not a liar. Her warnings were real. But the question burned inside him. What exactly had she seen? What truth had been so terrible that her own people chose to cut out her tongue rather than listen? He began to search for answers in places most had forgotten. Late at night, when the city slept under its glowing towers, he walked into the archives, a dusty hall of stone tablets, metal scrolls, and broken records guarded by machines too old to care. There he found whispers of the past, hidden between faded lines, records of accidents long buried, times when the power core had nearly failed before. But each report ended with the same words, contained by the council, Nothing more. Nothing honest. He brushed dust away with trembling fingers. His heart heavy with suspicion, the mechanic leaned closer, tracing one record with his dirty hands. It spoke of an ancient warning, a voice from decades ago. Another alien who once stood in the streets, shouting that the city's heart would collapse. But history showed the same ending. The voice was silenced. The truth erased. He felt a chill. It was a pattern. Every generation someone tried to speak, and every generation the council buried them. He whispered under his breath, "She was not the first, but maybe she is the last." Back in his workshop, he tried to sleep, but the night dragged on with restless thoughts. His dreams filled with fire, towers collapsing, alien children screaming, and always, the silent prisoner staring at him, her mouth bleeding, her hands clawing symbols in the dust. He woke with a gasp, his heart racing. The next day, while walking through the market, he listened carefully to the elders sitting by the fires. They told stories to the young, myths of the city's great power, but in their shaky voices. He heard cracks. One old alien muttered, "Long ago, before the towers, the earth shook, the sky burned." But the council said it was lies. The mechanic's eyes narrowed. He bought drinks for the elder and asked softly, "Who said it was lies?" The elder coughed, his eyes darting left and right. Voices who saw too much, always lies, always punished, always gone. Then the elder turned away. Afraid, the human knew now, this was no single mistake. This was a chain of silence stretching back through time. The prisoner was part of a legacy of voices destroyed for speaking truth. That night, he returned to the prison. The guards mocked him again, but he did not care. He knelt close to the bars, whispering to her, "I found them. I know the council has done this before. You are not the first." Her eyes widened, wet with tears. Her hands shook as she pressed them against the cold bars. She tried to draw in the dirt again, her movements weak but urgent. Circles, cracks, fire, towers falling. He reached through the bars and grabbed her hand, whispering, "I believe you. I will not let them bury your truth." Her body trembled, but for the first time, her gaze softened, filled with fragile hope. The human returned home with a fire burning in his chest. He could not keep this to himself anymore. The council's lies were too deep, too cruel. He began to write down everything he had seen, every mark she drew, every whisper from the archives, every old story from the elders. He built a map of truth from the fragments they tried to erase. But even as he worked, he felt eyes on him, shadows following in the streets, neighbors whispering louder when he passed. The council's hand was reaching. He knew if they suspected him, they would silence him too. Still, he pressed on, for the whispers of the past were too heavy to ignore. He could hear them even in silence, voices of the forgotten crying out through time, warning, pleading, demanding to be heard. And now, through him, through a simple human mechanic who once fixed ships and engines, their whispers had found new life. Their truth would not be buried again. But the council would not let this stand. Asterisk, the forbidden truth. The human mechanic knew he could not rely only on whispers. He needed proof, something solid, something that even the council could not bury. But finding that proof meant stepping into places no outsider was allowed. Late at night, he carried a small pack of tools and walked into the lower tunnels beneath the city. These tunnels were meant for engineers, but most avoided them. The air was thick. The walls hummed with unstable energy. The deeper he went, the louder the vibrations grew. His flashlight flickered across rusted pipes and glowing veins of crystal, the same crystal that fed the towers above. He placed his hand against the wall. It was hot, too hot, like a machine running at its breaking point. His chest tightened. She had been right all along. He pushed forward, careful not to make noise, until he reached a locked gate, old and covered in warning signs. "Council eyes only," the words glowed in red. But he pulled out a thin tool and forced the lock. The gate creaked open, the sound echoing like thunder in the empty dark. Beyond the gate lay a chamber of machines, massive engines pulsing with unstable light. Cracks ran across the crystal cores, sparks hissed from broken lines. Every part screamed of collapse. His hands shook as he stared, his mind replaying her desperate gestures. The cracks, the falling towers, the fire, all of it was here before his eyes. But the worst part was not the damage, it was the silence. No repair crews, no alarms, no effort to fix it. Only neglect, only silence. The council knew, they had seen this, and they had chosen to hide it. The human pulled out a small recorder he had built himself. He captured the sound of the unstable engines, the glowing cracks, the vibrations shaking the walls. He whispered, "This is the truth." But even as he recorded, heavy footsteps echoed behind him. He froze, then slipped behind a broken pipe. Hiding in the shadows, 2 alien guards entered, their armor marked with the council's crest. One of them muttered, "Another surge." "The core won't last a season," the other hissed. "Do not speak of it. Do not even think of it. If anyone spreads this, they will join the liar." They moved past him, their voices fading. The mechanic's heart pounded. Now he knew for certain, they were not just hiding the truth. They were protecting their lies with fear. When the guards left, he slipped out, his body tense with every step. When he finally reached the surface, the city lights looked different. Colder. "False," he whispered under his breath. "They all live in a lie." The next day, he returned to the prison, his eyes burning with anger. He pressed close to her cell, whispering, "I saw it. I saw everything." "You were right." Her eyes widened, her chained hands trembled. She reached out and gripped the bars. Her silent mouth opened as if to scream. But no sound came. Tears fell down her cheeks. He held up the recorder, letting her see the glow of proof. Her gaze softened with hope, but also fear. She shook her head, pointing again and again at the towers above. Her gestures sharp, warning him. He realized what she meant. The collapse was closer than anyone believed. Time was running out. That night, he sat in his workshop, spreading his notes, her symbols, and the recordings across the table. The truth was too big to hide. But if he spoke aloud, if he confronted the council, they would silence him too. He remembered the old records, the voices of the past, all destroyed, all erased. He clenched his fists, whispering, "Not this time." Still, doubt gnawed at him. What if no one listened? What if his proof was destroyed before it reached the people? What if he failed her, failed them all? The workshop walls seemed to close in on him, shadows stretching longer. He felt the weight of the city pressing down. Millions of lives above him, trusting the council's lies, blind to the danger beneath their feet. The human knew he could not turn back. He had stepped into forbidden's truth. And once you see the cracks, you cannot unsee them. Once you hear the silence, you cannot unhear it. And now, with the prisoner's silent eyes guiding him, he carried a truth so heavy it could break him or save them all. The risky choice. The human mechanic sat in his workshop surrounded by shadows. His tools lay scattered. The recorder glowed faintly on the table, playing back the deep hum of failing engines. Sparks and cracks from the forbidden's chamber. Proof of what the silent prisoner had tried to warn them. Proof of what the council had buried. His hands trembled as he listened again. He knew the truth now, but truth alone was dangerous. The council had eyes everywhere. They silenced voices. They erased names. If he spoke aloud, his life would end just like hers. But when he closed his eyes, he saw her face, chained, broken, yet filled with a fire that even silence could not kill. She had given everything for the truth, and now she had given that truth to him. Could he really turn away? Could he live knowing millions might die while he kept quiet? For hours he paced the room, torn between fear and duty. He was only a mechanic, not a leader, not a warrior. No one would listen to him. He could disappear, and no one would notice. Yet the thought of doing nothing weighed heavier than the fear of death. That night he returned to the prison. The guards were lazy, half asleep. He moved close to her cell and whispered, "I cannot stay silent, but if I act, they will come for me. They will come for you too." Her eyes locked on his. Her thin hands rose. She pointed at herself, then at him, then pressed her chained fists together, a sign of unity. He understood. She was telling him he would not be alone. She would guide him, even without her tongue. She could still be his voice. Together they could fight. The human took a deep breath, whispering, "Then we fight." Her eyes shined with a faint light, the first spark of hope he had ever seen in them. The next day, he began his plan in the marketplace. He traded quietly for old schematics in the scrapyards. He gathered broken parts in hidden corners. He spoke to workers and traders, asking careful questions. He learned that others had seen the flickers in the towers. Others had felt the vibrations in the walls. Fear was spreading, but no one dared to speak. He wrote everything down, building a map of failing systems. Every sign pointed to the same end: collapse. Still, he knew whispers and records were not enough. People feared the council more than death itself. He needed to show them. He needed to make them see with their own eyes. That evening, he sneaked into the tunnels again, this time with a small group of devices he had built. Sensors, lights, and a crude projector. He placed them near the failing engines, recording every flicker, every spark, every tremor in the ground. When he tested the projector back in his workshop, the image of cracking crystal filled the wall. Glowing like fire, he imagined showing this to the people. Imagined their fear turning into anger. Imagined their silence breaking, but fear gnawed at him too. The council would not forgive such defiance. They would brand him a traitor. They would end him just as they ended her. One night, he sat again at her cell, whispering through the bars, "If I do this, I may not live to see tomorrow." She shook her head fiercely, pointing at her heart, then at the sky. She was telling him some truths were worth dying for. The human swallowed hard. He finally understood. Survival meant nothing if it was built on lies. Real life meant carrying the truth, even if it burned him alive. The risky choice was clear now. He would not hide. He would not run. He would act. The next morning, the mechanic looked at the city differently. The shining towers no longer seemed like symbols of strength. They looked fragile, hollow, waiting to fall. He tightened his fists, whispering, "If they will not speak, then I will." He knew he could not do it alone, but he had her, the silent prisoner who had carried the truth, even after losing her voice. Together, they would face the storm. And so, the human mechanic, once just an outsider fixing broken ships, stepped into his fate, carrying forbidden proof and a vow to free her voice, not with words, but with action. The choice had been made. There was no turning back. Asterisk, the collapse. The first sign came at dawn. The towers flickered. The steady glow that had lit the city for centuries trembled like a candle in the wind. People looked up nervously. Whispers filled the streets. But the council ordered calm. "It is nothing. Go back to work," they declared. Yet beneath their words the ground shook. The human mechanic felt it strongest in his workshop. Tools rattled off the shelves. Engines groaned as if crying. He rushed into the tunnels. The heat slammed into him, worse than before. The walls pulsed with unstable light. Cracks spread wider across the crystals. Sparks exploded in showers. The prisoner had warned him. Again and again with her trembling hands. The time was near. Now it was happening. He sprinted to the prison, pushing through panicked crowds. Alarms rang across the city. Guards shouted orders. But fear had broken their discipline. When he reached her cell, dust rained from the ceiling. The air smelled of smoke. He shouted, "It has begun." "We have no choice now," she stood, chains rattling, her eyes blazing with urgency. He pulled out his tools and slammed them against the lock. Sparks flew, metal bent. The gate groaned until finally it burst open. She stumbled forward, weak but free. For the first time since her capture, together they ran through the chaos. Towers above them blinked like dying stars. The streets cracked, energy surged wildly through pipes. Alien citizens screamed, some knelt in prayer. Others fled without direction. The human dragged her into the tunnels. She pointed furiously, guiding him through the maze. Her gestures sharp, precise. Even without words she led him like a navigator steering a ship through storm. Her silence became the strongest voice he had ever known. When they reached the great chamber, the sight froze him, the heart of the city. The massive crystal engine was tearing itself apart. Fire burst from broken lines. Glowing fractures split across its surface. The air vibrated so violently it hurt to breathe. She pointed at the core, then at him, her hands moving desperately. He understood. She knew the sequence. She had studied this collapse before they silenced her. He was her hands now, she was his voice. He leapt into action. Pulling wires, rerouting power. Forcing broken circuits back into place, she signaled furiously. Shake of the head for wrong, sharp nod for right. Sweat poured down his face, his arms burned. Yet he followed her without question. Above them the city groaned like a dying beast. Explosions echoed, dust rained down, screams carried through the tunnels. The people above still believed their counsel, still waited for safety that would never come. The human shouted over the roar. "We can still save them." She met his eyes, nodding. Her silent mouth forming words he could not hear, but understood. Do not stop. Minutes felt like hours. Every mistake could mean death. He forced open a heavy panel. Inside was a web of glowing veins. Unstable and ready to burst, he hesitated. But her hands sliced the air. Demanding he cut one line, then seal another, he obeyed. Sparks exploded against his skin. The pain seared him. But the system groaned and shifted. The pressure eased slightly. They worked together, machine and mind. Silence and sound, their movements in sync. The mechanic realized something powerful. She was not only telling the truth, she had been the only one who understood the heart of the city. She had been its guardian, and they had destroyed her voice now. As fire and chaos raged around them, it was the human who gave her voice back, through his hands, through his courage. Finally, with one last desperate strike of his wrench, the main surge channel closed, the violent shaking slowed. The light of the crystal dimmed into a steady glow, not stable, but alive, alive enough to hold the city a little longer. They both collapsed against the wall, gasping, covered in burns and dust, but alive. The chamber hummed with slower rhythm. The roar turned into a low thrum. Above, the people screamed. But the city still stood. The human looked at her, his chest heaving, whispering, "We bought them time." She stared back, tears sliding down her face for the first time since her chains. Her silence felt like triumph, but it was not over. The council would never forgive this. They would twist the truth again, call him a criminal, call her a curse, unless he acted, unless he spoke for her. The collapse had been slowed, not stopped. The greater battle was just beginning. The vindication. The city was still trembling after the near collapse. Smoke curled between the crystal towers. Citizens filled the streets, confused, afraid, demanding answers. The council stood on high platforms, their robes shining, their voices calm but cold. "The danger has passed," they declared. "The council has protected you, as it always has." But the people were no longer convinced. Their eyes shifted nervously. Whispers spread. Too many had seen the towers flicker. Too many had felt the ground split beneath their feet. And in the heart of the crowd stood the human mechanic. His clothes torn, his arms burned. Beside him stood the tongueless prisoner, her chains broken, her silent eyes blazing with truth. The guards tried to block them, but the people pressed closer, curious, drawn to the sight of an outsider standing beside the woman they had long called a liar. The mechanic climbed onto a broken stone, lifting the small projector he had built. The machine sparked to life, casting images across the tower walls. The crowd gasped. They saw the cracks in the crystal, the sparks bursting from the failing engines, the chamber shaking with violent energy, the very heart of the city breaking before their eyes. The council shouted, "Lies, these are lies." But their voices shook. Their confidence faltered. The human pointed at the prisoner, his voice loud and steady. "She told you the truth. She warned you. She tried to save you, and for that, you cut out her tongue." Silence fell heavy across the square. The prisoner stepped forward, her body trembling. She raised her scarred mouth, opening it to show the wound they had given her. Gasps echoed. Mothers covered their children's eyes. Shame rippled through the crowd. The mechanic continued, I saw it with my own eyes. I walked into the forbidden chambers. I heard the engine scream. I felt the ground burn. Everything she said was true. Everything she risked her life to speak. The council tried to shout him down, but the people had already turned. Anger rose like fire. Voices erupted. They lied to us. They silenced her. They let the city burn. The guards hesitated, their spears trembling. Some lowered their weapons, unwilling to strike against their own families. The human lifted the recorder, letting its hum play through the square. The deep, unstable roar of the core shook the air. Proof no words could deny. The crowd roared with fury. Their fear turning into strength, they surged forward. Not with weapons, but with voices, shouting, demanding, refusing silence. The prisoner fell to her knees, tears streaming. Not of weakness, but of release. For the first time, her truth had been heard. Not through her own tongue, but through the courage of another. The human knelt beside her, whispering, "You are free now. They cannot bury you anymore." The council, pale and broken, tried to flee, but the people surrounded them. Their robes tore, their power crumbled. Years of silence shattered in a single moment. Later, as the sun set, the mechanic stood before the crowd again. The prisoner at his side, he spoke simply. "The core is still broken. We must fix it together. No more lies. No more silence." The people nodded, their eyes turning not to the council, but to him, to her, to the truth that had survived chains, fire, and cruelty. The silent prisoner raised her hands, her gestures now clear to all. She pointed to the sky, then to the ground, then pressed her hands to her heart. The mechanic spoke her meaning aloud. "She says we are one. We live or die together." The crowd erupted in a cheer that shook the towers more than any tremor. From that day forward, the woman once called a liar became a symbol. Her silence spoke louder than the council's lies. Her scarred mouth became a mark of honor. And the human mechanic, once just an outsider, became her voice, carrying her truth wherever it was needed. The city would rebuild. The core would be repaired. But the greatest change was not in the engines. It was in the people. They had learned that truth cannot be chained, cannot be silenced, cannot be cut away. And in the middle of it all stood a human and a tongueless alien. Proof that even in the darkest silence, truth will always find a voice.